Judge attacks Karoline Leavitt and slapped on her face for asking question on truth. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the black Ford Explorer, the cold bite of Manchester's winter air striking her face as she made her way onto the slushy curb of Chestnut Street. Her attorney, Alan Dorsey, walked beside her, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. Cameras from local news outlets buzzed, capturing every step as reporters, standing by their vans, eagerly waited for the next big headline. The scene wasn't new to Karoline. She had faced pressure before, but today felt different. The issue at hand, a complaint tied to a remark she made during a speech at a veterans fundraiser the previous fall, was supposed to be insignificant. A single sentence, taken completely out of context, was being twisted into an accusation of violating state campaign ethics laws. Her lawyers had argued that the complaint had no merit, and everyone in her corner had expected the hearing to be a formality that would quickly be dismissed. But as they entered Courtroom 4B, Karoline could sense something was off. This wasn't going to be routine. Judge Ronald Marks, known for his bluntness and strong opinions, arrived late, disheveled and unfazed by the attention. His half-buttoned robe and worn leather notebook gave him an air of relaxed authority that only added to his intimidating presence. He made no effort to acknowledge the room and sat down, adjusting his microphone before flipping through papers as if the proceedings were little more than a nuisance. Karoline had seen him on television. He was notorious for his opinions on corruption, but also for his controversial handling of political cases. It quickly became apparent which version of Judge Marks had shown up that day without hesitation. He turned his focus to Karoline, launching into a sharp critique of her judgment and the appropriateness of the comments she made at the veterans event. Alan tried to object, but Judge Marks silenced him with a cold glance. This hearing, it seemed, was no longer about the complaint. It had become personal. Judge Marks began questioning whether Karoline's speech was an ethical matter or merely an attempt to remain relevant in the public eye, undermining the integrity of civic discourse. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the tension palpable as Marks's voice grew louder, targeting Karoline's rise to fame and dismissing her generation's approach to politics. The pressure was mounting, but Karoline remained composed. Her response was calm but firm. "Are we discussing complaint, or is this a public review of my career?" Marks smirked, implying that, to him, they were one and the same. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the tension continued to rise. Alan, trying to regain control, made a formal motion to redirect the hearing. But Marks ignored him, turning the courtroom into a stage for his own personal agenda. Just when it seemed that things couldn't become more chaotic, the door at the back of the room creaked open. A court officer entered quietly, taking a position near the door. Though no one paid much attention at first, Karoline's eyes subtly flicked toward the officer. Something was changing behind the scenes, though she couldn't yet tell what it was. Judge Marks, undeterred, pressed on, now focusing on Karoline's character. He demanded to know where her boldness had been when she accused elected officials of selling out the country during her fundraiser speech. Karoline stood her ground, her response steady. "I stand by what I said. I was speaking to veterans, men and women who served our country." The room tensed further, but Karoline didn't flinch. She held Marks's gaze, unyielding. The judge's tirade continued, but Karoline wasn't backing down. "Do you treat every young woman who speaks her mind this way, or just the ones who disagree with your politics?" she asked, her voice cutting through the growing tension. For a moment, Marks hesitated. There was a brief flicker of calculation in his eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. "I treat people based on what they say and how they act," he responded coolly, dismissing Karoline as just another figure in his courtroom drama. The atmosphere in the room thickened, and the presence of two federal agents standing quietly near the back door began to shift the air. Karoline could sense the change, but didn't let it distract her. Meanwhile, Judge Marks continued his verbal attack, accusing Karoline of treating politics as a performance. Karoline, still composed, responded with a challenge of her own. "Is this hearing truly about accountability, or is it just an attempt to intimidate me?" she asked. Her voice steady. Marks didn't respond with words. Instead, he offered a thin, almost mocking smile, his gaze returning to the papers in front of him. He was dismissing her once again, and it was clear that he wasn't interested in answering any of her questions. Downstairs in the courthouse, two federal agents, Agent Kating and Laura Hendricks, stood in an unmarked hallway, their badges clipped securely to their jackets. They had been waiting for a signal, watching the unfolding events above. They weren't focused on the back and forth between Karoline and Judge Marks. Their attention was on something else entirely. something far more significant in the courtroom. The tension between Karoline and Judge Marks continued to escalate, but the agent's eyes remained trained on a different target. Whatever was happening in that room, Karoline knew it was much bigger than the complaint against her. Something larger was at play, and she could feel the shift in the air. The agents, though silent and unobtrusive, were an undeniable presence, and Karoline wondered just how far the situation was going to go was unfolding. The tension in the courtroom became almost palpable. The agents, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos of the moment, stood firm, unyielding, while the weight of their actions began to sink in. Jillian Vargas's whistle blowing. The carefully hidden truths were finally seeing the light. The walls that had once protected Judge Marks were crumbling, and there was no turning back now as Keating continued reading the charges aloud. The courtroom hung on each word. The charges were grave: obstruction of justice, illegal campaign contributions, tampering with court records, and abuse of judicial authority. These weren't just accusations. They were evidence of a long-standing pattern of misconduct, and Marks knew that. His face drained of color, the shock on his face momentarily freezing him in place with a growl of disbelief. Marks grabbed the edge of the bench, as if physically trying to hold on to his last shred of power. "This is a setup," he spat, his voice rising. "This is political. You've been waiting for this." His eyes shifted to Karoline, as if he needed someone to blame. "You think this is justice," he barked. "You think this is real," but Keating, undeterred, didn't flinch. He stood tall, a picture of composure in the storm. "Judge Ronald Marks, we are taking you into custody on the authority of this federal warrant," he said, his tone unwavering. The words hung in the air like an undeniable verdict. No one dared to speak. The room was frozen, suspended in time as the magnitude of the moment settled in. Marks's hands trembled as he tried to assert control, but his voice faltered. "What are you doing? This is absurd." His face flushed with anger, the realization that he was losing his grip on power sinking in with every passing second.